But there's so many choices in the shower. I said, oh, shower is water.
I mean, I don't have a bath. Do you have a bath? Everything. This would have been a good meeting to bring somebody to. No, that is. If you see me get up, if you see me stand up, I'm just probably going to do the stand. And then I'll keep an eye on the queue. Do you want to take questions as we go?
Yeah. Okay. Because the topics are sufficiently diverse that it might make sense.
Okay. I'll keep an eye on that too. We did okay last time with the timing.
Yeah. I make no promises about this time. Past performance is no indicator of future.
We have a 15-minute break scheduled after this, so we need to change that to like a 10-minute break. We're going to give it another minute to let people come in the room. For those of you just joining, if you could scan the QR code, let us know you're in the room. That would be great. All right, you're in session 5. This is advanced topics, and I am going to turn it over to Leslie.
Thank you very much. Yes, here we are. And I will, on Michelle's behalf, I will remind you to please scan the QR code that has now disappeared from the screen. Yeah, I don't think it is anywhere, but please log in on the Meet Echo tool to make sure that people know that we know who is here and how many people attended this session, and also so that you can ask questions. So I'll use that as an opportunity to say this session has a lot of semi-related topics, but they are pretty diverse. So I'm happy to take questions as we go along on the individual topics. We don't have to wait all the way to the end. So hello, my name is Leslie Daigle. I've been actively involved in participating in IETF work for a little more than 30 years. It really terrifies me to be able to say that. And yes, I currently chair the Media Operations Working Group, which is meeting tomorrow at noon, if you wanted to come along and join that working group. So this is an IETF session, so you should note well that there are IPR policies in place. There are also code of conduct policies in place, but by participating here, it is understood that you agree to follow the IETF processes and policies. So first up, protocol registries. So if you've been here through the day, I assume if you got on a plane to come here, it's because you are working on some kind of protocol standardization or are interested in working on some. And if you've been here through the day, you've heard a lot about the processes around how to create a draft, how to submit work, how to engage in working group work around protocol definition. But many protocols, once defined, the definition of the structure of the protocol is static and published in an RFC, but the protocol itself might rely on parameters that need to get assigned as time goes by. And that's the purpose of the protocol registries, which are housed at www.iana.org, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. So these are typically codes or keywords or numbers, and they are, as I said, stored in registries operated by IANA. Here's some examples from a media types registry. So every time a new media type is defined, because that happens so often now, for email or use in email or whatever, the type is registered in an IANA registry so that it is accessible publicly and so that the definition of whatever definition of that parameter can be found publicly. And it's so common that this is why every RFC that gets published has to have an IANA considerations section, which is defined in RFC 8126, I believe, which also defines how to establish a registry for a protocol if you are defining a new protocol that requires some kind of parameters that will be set on an ongoing basis. And in case you've never really thought about this much, it's worth spending a minute thinking about what different types of parameters those might be. Sometimes there are parameters that are for private use. So these ones are not recorded. These are things like experimental, when you're playing with a protocol in your own network and you don't need to actually have that understood by any other network, then you can make use of a private use code point or protocol parameter. Similar for experimental use, some parameters are allocated in terms of hierarchy, and that hierarchy has to be defined in the standard that defines the protocol and the IANA registry. Some are accessible on a first come, first served basis. Some of them require expert review. You can't just have any old code point. You actually have to demonstrate that there is a need for the code point. And that's often done in the case where there is a limited number of code points available, for instance. And that's usually also associated with ones that require a specification. So you can't just say, hey, I'd like code point X. You actually have to write a specification to say, this is how it is used and this is how you should use it. And that's the sort of thing that gets registered with the code point in the IANA registry. So that's sort of the increasing level of formality in the how to specify and access these code points, which is relevant whether you are looking to use an item in an IANA registry or if you're working on a protocol that will have these parameters going forward. So I guess I'll pause there for a minute to see if there are any questions on that section. So it's kind of a swing to go from code points in your protocols, which everybody wants to know about and needs to know about, to patents and similar intellectual property rights, which is something that most people think they don't need to know about and don't want to talk about. But in fact, everybody needs to think about. The IETF data tracker has the functionality for people to disclose any awareness they have about intellectual property rights in the protocols that are being discussed in working groups and at the IETF. And if you read the note well, you'll note that you are obliged to share any IPR disclosures of which you are aware. And the reason for that is it's fairly straightforward to do. You just have to say who holds the IPR and why this is relevant to the IETF work, which IDs or RFCs it's relevant to, any other relevant IPR or patents that are related to it, and the licensing. And the reason that you need to have a disclosure, we need to have disclosures, is because the IETF works to build open protocols that can be implemented by everybody. And if you've gone through months and months and months of working group discussion and negotiation to find the exactly right technical solution and go to publish it as an RFC and then discover that somebody actually has a patent on that, it's kind of discouraging and it's kind of a problem and it's kind of something that we would like to avoid. So it is not fair game to, for instance, for a bad actor to come into an IETF working group, with a patent on a particular algorithm or approach, and then work in the working group and get the working group to adopt that approach, and then say, "Ha, I hold a patent, and you'll have to get a license from me." That's exactly what the NOTE-WELL and the IPR rules of the IETF are meant to discourage. Although be aware, this doesn't actually stop the IETF from getting into some awkwardness with IPR, because the IETF only checks the disclosures that they appear to be objectively false, doesn't check for patents, doesn't check if the patents are relevant, doesn't attempt to check for prior art. So the IETF is looking to capture disclosures of IPR. It does not actually have a herd of IPR lawyers in the background who are doing the patent office type work. So it's still a very tricky and messy area. And when you make a disclosure, you might be disclosing awareness of intellectual property rights from an organization that doesn't participate in the IETF, and the IETF wants to know about that as well. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions about that entirely murky topic. Okay.
This is Sano. My question is about IANA. As I understand, not only IETF, but also other standard organization can register into the IANA. For example, MPEG or W3C. What is the different the registration process from IETF and other organizations?
So I'm actually going to turn to Michelle, see if she would like to comment. What other organizations, understanding that other organizations can publish into IANA registries, or how is the IETF process different from, say, W3C or others? Or do they publish through IETF?
It really depends on the registration procedures for a registry. So if the registry requires things to be in an internet draft or an RFC, then they have to go through the IETF. There are registries, for example, what Leslie said, they have expert review, or it's just first come, first serve. So other organizations can put stuff in existing registries without going through a documentation process through the IETF. I'm not really too aware of what the other organizations' processes are for their own registries, or what registries they have. Because I only worked with the IANA registries previously, but
I think it's one of those things that in principle it's possible, in practice it doesn't happen an awful lot.
Yeah.
So the bulk of the registrations would be in IANA, from the IETF rather, sorry.
And if that doesn't answer your question, come see us after and we'll see if we can find you the right information.
Jeff Lombardo. So one of the questions I have is that how much of a thorough full research we must do onto those potentially existing patents before we propose an ID and we try to go through the draft process?
Yeah, so I think that the answer there is if you have a suspicion that there might be intellectual property in the space, it would be good if you could do some research and determine whether there might be. And if you think there might be, you might want to raise that with the working group chair and get others to help in the research. In terms of the policy requirements at the IETF, the policy says if you are aware of it, you must disclose it. And then generally we hope, nobody wants to wind up in a situation where there's IPR encumbered protocols. So this is the sort of lightest weight approach to try to make sure we have the most awareness possible and ability to avoid it. And then we deal with it if we actually hit it as a problem. Yeah, thanks. And so that sometimes leads to disputes and appeals. Of course, IPR is not the only reason why you might have a dispute. They're not uncommon. You will understand that during the IETF meetings this week, there will be some heated debate. A number of working groups will be at a critical point in the development of a protocol where, part of the working group thinks it absolutely has to be that way, and the other part of the working group thinks it has to be the other way, and these are, completely different and impossible things. So while the working group chair is attempting to achieve group consensus, when the consensus is called and the chair says, it seems that the working group consensus is this way, then part of the working group may say, that's entirely wrong. I think you've called consensus improperly, or I think it's a wrong decision. So both in terms of calling consensus, in terms of individual chair decisions, in terms of, or area director decisions, in terms of ballot decisions, if you think that something was wrong, either because of a process error, for example, my views were not actually considered, or a technical error, there is the ability to dispute the decision. And it's a fairly elaborated process. And stepwise, the first thing to do is to talk to the working group chair. So if you think that there was a mistake made, a process or technical error made in a working group, go to the working group chair and talk about it. If that doesn't work, then you can talk to the responsible area director or area directors and say, I really think this working group chair hasn't fully understood the point. Can you help me resolve this? And only if neither of those approaches work, then you can start in the official dispute resolution appeal mechanism. So the first step is a formal appeal to the ISG, and there is a process and time scale for that. And all of the appeals that go to the ISG are published along with the response of the ISG. And then if that still is not satisfactory, the IAB, the next step is to appeal to the IAB, which also has a process and time scale. And all of those appeals are also published along with the responses. You'll see some of those published this week. It's part of the IAB report for the plenary. They had 3 appeals that they have dealt with since the last IETF meeting. And then finally, there are a few cases under which appeals a process appeal, and only a process appeal, not a technical appeal, can be taken up from the IAB, can be taken up to the Internet Society Board of Trustees. And that's pretty rare, and generally one wishes to avoid it. So here's some examples of ISG appeals, and you can see with the red arrow that one appeal was dealt with by the ISG. The appellant was not happy with the outcome, didn't think it actually addressed it, and then took it to the IAB for further consideration. So who is this mysterious IAB that I've been mentioning? I think you've had an introduction to the ISG because they are a core part of the process of defining standards, but the IAB is not the Internet Advertisement Board. It is the Internet Architecture Board. There actually is an Internet Advertisement body. So our IAB is the Internet Architecture Board that used to be the Internet Activities Board, and it has a long, long history and has sort of changed its role over the years, but it's both a committee of the IETF and an advisory body of the Internet Society, and its role is architectural oversight, which is why they have technical programs and workshops. They are engaged in BOF, Birds of a Feather evaluation, and they work to confirm the appointments to the ISG and have other important appointments that they do, including appointing the IRTF chair, the independent submission editor, and others. And they are responsible for liaison coordination with other organizations, i.e. when the IETF has a liaison relationship with another organization like the ITU, it is the IAB that appoints the person to undertake that role and manages the formal communications. And as we've just seen, has some standards process oversight and a role in the appeal process. So this is relatively recent work. Some of the programs that the IAB has been running, so you get a sense of the level and scale of their technical work, the environmental impacts and sustainable of internet technology, sustainability, for example. And they've had some workshops with published meeting reports, which are published as RFCs. Yeah, and some sample RFCs from the IAB. They do not publish technical standards. If the IAB has something on their plate that requires publication as a BCP or a standard, that would be work that would be submitted to the ISG for review as part of the normal IETF standard. I've mentioned the IRTF, which is the Internet Research Task Force. It's an activity of the IAB. It's parallel organization to the IETF. It's focused on research. It's largely looks at longer term issues than individual working groups. So it has similarity to the IETF in the sense that there are research groups that have a stated purpose and people participate in them, but it's entirely separate from the IETF. It's only as a matter of convenience that many research groups meet at the IETF. Some research groups don't. And the purpose of the RTF is, again, to look at the longer term speculative aspects of internet technical development. So the important thing to know about the IRTF chair is Dirk Kucher, who was appointed by the IAB at the beginning of the year. And the steering group for the IRTF is made up of all of the research group chairs. And like the IAB, they can only publish informational and experimental RFCs if there's some work that is done in a research group that looks like it's standards or best current practices. It gets submitted through the IETF process. And there is a supplementary code of conduct for the IRTF covering academic integrity and research ethics and more, because the participation in that is largely skewed more towards academics than the IETF work itself. Having said that, the IRTF meetings are open. You are welcome to attend any research group meeting that is meeting in the IETF program this week. And I would even encourage you to go to the IRTF open meeting, where typically they have research prize winners presenting their work. And it can usually be a pretty fascinating look at some particular aspect of measurement or internet technology. So here are some of the recent RFCs from the IRTF. So how do all these structures get populated? How do you get on the IRTF? How do you get on the IAB? The NOMCOM is responsible for making many of the appointments to these different bodies. Here is a diagram describing the relationship of the different bodies that I've been talking about and the ones you've heard about already today. it's pretty complex and ugly. And like any other diagram describing the relationship between the organizations, it has some ways in which it is correct and some ways in which people would dispute whether it's correct. But notably, nobody is on top. It's very important. But it is a complex relationship between the different bodies, and the nominating committee, the NOMCOM, has responsibility for appointing many of the positions. So the NOMCOM itself is formed with a non-voting chair appointed by the Internet Society CEO. The previous chair, so last year's chair, is also part of the NOMCOM. And then there are 10 voting members that are selected from volunteers. That says no two from the same company, but I think it really is not more than two from the same company. And then the definition is in RFC 3797. And then there are non-voting liaisons from the different bodies that are having people appointed to them by the NOMCOM. The work of the NOMCOM is done annually. It's a large chunk of work. It's quite a heavy lift every year. Once the new NOMCOM chair is appointed, there's a call for volunteers. And then from the volunteers who are eligible, the NOMCOM participants are selected at random. And then the actual process begins. So this week, we have this year's NOMCOM is constituted. We know who the chair is. We know who the selected NOMCOM members are. And so this is when the process begins for identifying candidates for the open roles that the NOMCOM will be filling. So that's approximately half the ISG. Since appointments are for 2 years and it's staggered, about half the ISG is going to be appointed or reappointed for next year, half the IAB, as well as appointments to the IETF LLC and the IETF Trust. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of finding volunteers to fill the roles, interviewing the candidates for the roles, reviewing the feedback on the candidates for the roles. And it is a heavy lift, but this is my pitch. After all of that, this is my pitch. When you have attended enough IETF meetings to be eligible for the NOMCOM, I encourage you to volunteer for it, because it can be a really fascinating way to learn a lot more about how the different pieces of the IETF fit together and understand what's actually going on in the IETF. So if you're here working on a particular protocol in a particular part of the IETF, you may not see a whole lot in the other areas. And being part of the NOMCOM would certainly give you a good visibility into all of it. And that sort of leads to the final point, which is you've seen the short form version of the mission of the IETF on all the slides, but the mission of the IETF is to make the internet work better by producing high quality, relevant technical documents that influence the way people design, use, and manage the internet. So participating in a working group is the first way of volunteering your expertise to that mission. But all of the things that I've outlined here in terms of the structure of the IETF, in terms of the processes that guide how we run the standards process, and the ancillary bits like the IPR policy and handling appeals, et cetera, and even the creation of the IETF LLC and the IETF Trust, these are all things that were designed by the community when the community understood that there was a problem with the current structure, or there was a new need to be addressed as time goes by, and there are new things to be addressed. So this whole process supports itself. And when something needs to be changed, discussion using all of the methodologies described earlier is what is used to change it. So the whole process is meant to be open and collaborative. And if you contribute to this environment, you are actually contributing to shaping its future as well. So while everything presented today may sound like a bunch of disparate topics, it's all part and parcel of what it takes to do this as 1,000 network engineers flying in formation. So I think that's pretty much it for me. I'd be happy to take any questions. And I'm sure those slides will be available and you can refer back to them through the week or whenever you start to have a question about one of these topics.
Any questions?
The post-lunch slot is always the hard one.
All right. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you all.
So we do have a proper little break right now before we start session 6. Session 6 is going to be talking all about internet drafts and RFCs and understanding all the bits of information related to those documents. So take a couple minutes and stretch your legs, get some water. I did put some additional notebooks back there if anybody wants some IETF notebooks. And if you have any other questions, feel free to, you can still come to the queue and ask them. You can come up here. And if you haven't had a chance yet to test joining the queue in Meet Echo, you're more than welcome to do that now. You won't break anything. Just pop yourself in the queue and then take yourself out if you'd like. And we'll get started in about 15 minutes with session number 6. Put your foot on there. Oh, if you put your foot on there.
Higher? It's right. I think it's about right.
Oh, it's the little, see the little switch? Yep, that one right there. If you put it towards you.
That's good. I think that's about right.
You think that's okay? Just the microphone, not the stick. That's the stick. Okay. I mean, we have 62 versus on-site versus remote. Liz was thinking she was about justice. Every morning she's like, she's the queen of the agenda. Before we get started, if you haven't already, if you could scan that QR code, let us know you are in this meeting. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to pass it off to Alice. You are in session 6, Internet Drafts and RFCs. So off to Alice.
Hi, welcome. This is all about the documents that you heard about at the end of session 5, the high quality, relevant technical documents, the core output of the IETF and related organizations, and internet drafts as the key work item that's used in working groups. Yeah, I was gonna say it later. Feel free to ask questions at any time by coming to the microphone. Also, we'll take questions at the end. That's where we are. Hi, I'm Alice Russo. I'm part of the RFC Production Center. We edit and publish internet drafts that are approved, and they become RFCs. I'm interested in how IETF tools in education help authors put complex ideas into clear documents. My favorite RFC is 8700, which is 50 years of RFCs about the history of the document series, and includes essays from various people involved with RFCs, including Steve Crocker, and Vint Cerf, and Leslie Daigle, who spoke at session 5. Rich, you can come introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Rich Sauls. I work at Akamai. I've been involved in the IETF for far too long, I guess. First started working back when privacy enhanced mail, of which the only thing people remember is this base 64 encoding. If you've looked at like OpenSSL, you see dash, 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 begin X509 certificate. That's the heritage of PEM, the privacy enhanced mail stuff. I mainly work in the security area. I say I focus on the S and HTTPS, and I'll be talking in some of the middle session, and I'll turn it back to Dallas.
This is the note well that you've seen several times today and that you will see at the beginning of every working group session. The BCPs that are listed here will go into more detail about best current practice in this presentation. So RFC is a historical acronym for Request for Comments, because these documents, their historical purpose was in 1969 for graduate students at UCLA to share notes and ideas about the development, the initial stages of ARPANET. This was mentioned in session 1. And IDs in this context is internet drafts. To get a feel for your familiarity, raise your hand if you've referred to an RFC while implementing or researching how a protocol works? Looks like about half. Raise your hand if you have an idea that you want to document in an internet draft, but haven't done yet. Great. This session has some tips about getting started, where to grab the template, how to start putting your ideas down. So this session will cover the who, what, where of the RFC series. There are almost 10,000 RFCs. We'll go into each of these aspects in more detail. The authoritative site is rfc-editor.org. But of course, they're freely available. That's part of the core concept of the RFC series. So if you type an RFC number into your browser, you may find it on any various sites, including Data Tracker. And where the RFCs differ from internet drafts is that they're immutable. So if it has a mistake, it can be reported as a correction, which is called errata. If there's a mistake in how the document is actually generated, then yes, we'll replace it. That's the exception. Where do these RFCs come from? And you've learned a lot about this today. Internet drafts. So the internet drafts, in theory, are replaced. They have version numbers and they can be replaced over time. And they time out after 6 months and are moved to the archive. But they persist. So you're still able to find old internet drafts. We'll talk more about this. Datatracker.ietf.org offers the full transparency of how that internet draft came to be and how it changed along the way. And as you learned earlier, anyone can post an internet draft using the ID submission tool to upload the files. All right. Everybody has their favorite format to read an RFC or read an internet draft. And I go over how what formats exist. And these formats have evolved over time to provide features. So starting with the classic, plain text. So originally RFCs were typed and, sorry. Oh, great. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lucas. I just had a quick question because you said that there's RFC editor where you can look at RFCs. I was just wondering why it's named editor if they're first up immutable and maybe sort of the place where they're written is the data tracker, not the editor. Like, is that historic?
Yes, exactly. Great question. So for 28 years, John Postel was the person who took the internet drafts and turned them into RFCs, and that role, and then later as a whole function, was called RFC editor, as in the people who edit the RFCs. But you're correct. More accurately, we are editing the approved internet drafts to make them RFCs. So and the RFC editor function, now that primary, the professional editing service has been renamed RFC Production Center, but the historical name RFC editor still exists.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So RFCs were originally produced on hard copy and distributed by postal mail because the series itself predates online, and it also predates the creation of the IETF, which Jay mentioned this morning. So this plain text format has this historical legacy. This is RFC1 here by Steve Crocker. Because it's plain text, the diagrams are ASCII art. There are no hyperlinks. The line width is fixed and is difficult to read on a mobile device. And if something changes after publication, such as the document's been completely replaced, which is called obsoleted, or a part of the document has been changed, which is called updated, that's not shown on here. So there's no indication that there have been errata submitted. HTMLized plain text is basically adding links to the plain text format, and it will show metadata at the top to let you know if the document's been obsoleted or updated or has errata. The advantage here is that you can click and jump to if it references a section in another RFC, it'll take you to the other RFC. And sections within the document. The look and feel is the historical look and feel of the plain text documents. Then for more recent RFCs and all new RFCs, there's an HTML file which has a responsive design, meaning the page layout adapts to the window size, so it's better for reading on other devices. And there are fancier diagrams. SVG is scalable vector graphics, so this is an alternative to ASCII art, and they can be pretty complex. And the header, there's a header that's added on top to show you what's changed after publication. So for example, on this RFC 8829, you can see added at the top, obsoleted by 9429, which came later. And if this document had errata, it would also be noted. There's also a PDF, which is similar look to the HTML. It does not have the post-publication metadata at the top, however. It's the only format that's paginated, and some people like this one for printing or for using on an e-reader. And before RFC 8650, it's not a great PDF. It's a PDF of the plain text, as opposed to this one, which is for a more recent RFC, includes, looks more similar to the HTML. This is the source format that all these publication formats are generated from. It's a defined vocabulary in XML called RFC XML. It's the authoritative format for RFCs, but it's not designed for readers. And you can see it contains a bunch of metadata at the top, and the content of the document comes afterward. For writing an internet draft, you don't have to use RFC XML. There are other options, primarily a flavor of Markdown called Cram Down RFC, which Rich will cover more later. Okay, I think you've heard these words in the previous sessions today, so maybe this will shed more light on how these are used. Status is basically what kind of document is this? And subseries is special information within the RFC series that's related to status. And stream is where did it come from? What path did this document take to publication? So what kind of document is this? These quotes are from RFC 2026, which is about the internet standards process. Informational is usually use cases, applicability statements, framework, architecture. It's not the protocol itself. For example, a recent informational document is use cases for a path for PCE as central controller. And experimental is something that's a new extension on an existing protocol or a time-limited experiment where it's not ready for prime time. It's not ready to be a proposed standard. For example, a recent one is IMAP message limit extension from the art area. Proposed standard is the meat of the series, especially in recent years. So over 60% of the RFCs published last year are proposed standards. Many things that you're familiar with are proposed standards. For example, TLS 1.3, Quick, the core specifications of WebRTC. These are all proposed standards. These usually are things that are deployed and are things that are stable and have had design decisions made. There used to be an intermediate status for standards called draft standard. It's no longer used. So then internet standard would be the final standard stage when the standard's shown to be interoperable and widely deployed. An example of a recent internet standard is multicast listener discovery v2 for IPv6. Both proposed standard and internet standard are called standards track. So within standards track, there are two levels. When you're writing an internet draft, there is a place that you write intended status. And so that's where you're thinking, oh yeah, I think this is likely informational. People will give you advice on this, and you can seek advice on this. More statuses. BCPs for best current practice. There are two kinds of BCPs. One kind is about process, meaning like IETF process. So for example, today you heard about the IETF standards process, which is in BCP 9. It's a collection of RFCs. The other kind is about technology. And that's where you're saying, this is the best way we know how to do it. Giving guidelines. So a recent BCP of that nature is OAuth 2.0 security. Historic is a specification that's been superseded or is considered to be obsolete. So for example, the network time protocol v2 and v3 were recently moved to historic. The trick is here that every RFC that's been obsoleted, meaning completely replaced, has not been moved to this status historic. So only some obsolete RFCs are historic. It's not a comprehensive status that's used for everything that's deprecated. Also noted here are that some RFCs were published before statuses were introduced. So this is going back to the historical nature of the series. And those are marked as unknown status, with some of them having status retroactively applied. So one example of one with unknown status is RFC 1 that we saw earlier. A lot of the early RFCs have that status, are marked unknown. Okay. So subseries is a concept closely tied to the statuses we were just talking about. Some RFCs are internet standards, and they form the STD subseries. This means that they have a number assigned to them in the STD subseries in addition to the RFC number. And one STD number can be assigned to one RFC or multiple RFCs. So it's usually a logical grouping. For example, and similarly with BCPs. So some RFCs are best current practices. Those form the BCP subseries. In this example, BCP 226 is made up of 4 RFCs. Over time, the RFCs within a given STD or BCP can change. They can be added or removed or replaced. So like, for example, if RFC 9137 were obsoleted, meaning completely replaced by a different RFC, then the new RFC would be part of BCP 226. Another example is, so this is an example of a process, BCP. It's about meeting venues. A technology example is in the STD subseries. So you may be aware of these building blocks of the internet. STD5 is the internet protocol. STD6 is UDP, user datagram protocol. STD7 is TCP. And in STD7, a famous RFC is RFC 793, which was replaced, was obsoleted by RFC 9293. And at that time, RFC 9293 becomes part of STD7.
We have somebody in the queue.
Okay.
Yuri?
If memory serves, originally a proposed standard status was for RFCs that are pretty much done, but the working group requires more experience in reasonably wide deployment, after which it would move to the full standard or to draft and full in probably half a year or a few months. You mentioned that there is a lot of RFCs that appear to be stuck at proposed standard. Would you explain why? If there has been a consensus that it's a good thing to interoperate on that, and there are implementation and deployments, why would it not advance?
So great question. Like, why are so many RFCs stuck in the status of proposed standard, seemingly stuck? Part of the reason is that as the internet standards process was initially envisioned, they thought there would be regular review of the proposed standards, and this desire to do the effort to move them forward in the maturity, what they call the maturity levels of the standards. At this point, there's just 2, right, to move it forward to internet standard. But in reality, there hasn't been a desire to do that work. And the other part is that proposed standard, or one other part of it, Rich may have more to say on this. Another part of it is that when it's available as proposed standard, it's able to serve its purpose. It's able to be widely available. It's able to be referenced. And so by moving it to internet standard, it hasn't increased its ability to be used.
The main reason not to define an RFC as full standard was to make sure that there is no hidden quirk that previous smaller deployments did not discover. So the designers wanted to give some time for the practical evaluation before such advancement. The assumption is if proposed standard has been around for sufficient time and no such problem appeared, why would it not be advanced automatically as is?
Sure. So the answer is that it's not that there's a timer that's set, that it goes after so many years of deployment, it automatically moves to internet standard as opposed to proposed. It requires positive action from the authors, the working group, and the ISG have to review it. That work turned out to be not worth the effort. A proposed standard was a high enough bar that once it was accepted, then it would stand or fall on its own without that extra label. It was a trade-off. We thought, as Alice said earlier on, we thought there were going to be regular reviews. There used to be an RFC that would regularly publish what the list of standards were. Now it's just not worth the effort.
Okay, I'm moving to streams. This is, where did it come from? What path did this document take to become an RFC? And you've heard about these organizations in earlier sessions today. In the RFC series is primarily, at this point, IETF stream documents. So about 90% of documents from last year, RFCs published last year, were from the IETF stream. This is the only stream that can publish anything on the standards track or best current practice. And IAB stream, Leslie put a list up in the previous session. They publish workshop reports and architecture documents. A recent one was partitioning as an architecture for privacy. The IRTF, which is the Internet Research Task Force, publishes results of research, typically, or framing how research should proceed. And those documents come out of the research group process. So each stream has its own process for approving an internet draft for publication. And at the end of that process, it comes to the RFC Production Center. The editorial stream is a new stream for publishing policies related to the RFC series itself. It currently has 0 documents. The independent submission stream is for documents that are related to the internet, relevant, and improve interoperability. The head of this stream is the independent submissions editor, who's currently Elliot Lear, and he has an editorial board. They review the documents, and the criteria is transparent and available, so you can read more about this. An example of a recent independent submissions stream document is centralization, decentralization, internet standards. So big topics, but also getting into specifics and proprietary, like a company's specific protocol. For another example is ARMS Platform Security Architecture Attestation Token. Those documents usually have the possessive name of the company in the title, so you know what you're getting. So what content actually goes into these docs, the internet drafts that go to these streams and make their way to becoming RFCs? Rich is going to tell us about it.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the required content, which is sort of the overhead, the metadata, what some of the tooling that people who want to write drafts is, and then Alice will wrap up. Oops. Okay, forward. There we go. Okay, so the first part is a document header. As Alice mentioned, that's the sort of the metadata, the things that, depending on the publication format, if it's on the web, it can be dynamic. It's a PDF file, it's never going to change. There are common elements that appear in all sorts of, every single document, both a draft and an RFC. There are some differences between those two, but there's common stuff such as the title, author, and editor. There's really not much difference between whether someone is listed as an author or an editor. It used to be a more formal designation, but now it's, since the authors of, and I'll focus only about working group documents, working group drafts, not the ISE, the independent stream, or the IAB stuff, but if you're writing a document that is part of a working group, what you are doing is you are supposed to convey the consensus of what the working group has decided. So in that sense, you're the author of the actual words, but you're sort of the editor, and that you're taking, direction from the chair and the working group members. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. The date it's published. Drafts, a lot of the tooling will automatically put a publish date in there. As mentioned earlier, drafts expire and are archived after 6 months. They're still available. You have a link where you can get them. And if you go to the data tracker for that document, you'll see all the old versions and you can do diffs between them and fetch them. But they're archived. If nothing has happened to a document and the latest version has been archived, so in other words, it's been 6.5 months or 6 months and a day since somebody published an update, that's considered to be an expired draft. And you have to take few more clicks to get to it, but it's not there. It's not as readily available as the current drafts are. The category or the intended status for a draft, you say this is intended status standard track. In an RFC, it would say proposed standard and so on. If it modifies or obsoletes other documents, it would say things like in a draft, it will say this document obsoletes RFC 1234 2026 and 7592, and then in parentheses it will say if adopted or if accepted, meaning once it becomes an RFC, then that header changes to just obsoletes. You see it there in the top, it's a draft that says so obsoletes if approved, and then below when it's an actual RFC, it's been approved, so it just says obsoletes. Publication date, what status it is, for RFCs rather, drafts have working group. RFCs are publications of the entire IETF, so it doesn't say a working group. A stream implied if it's in a working group. When it expires for a draft, if it's published as an RFC, it gets an International Standard Serial Number, ISSN. That's like the little, however many digits it is, 12-digit number that appears in any kind of book or magazine you might see, and a document object identifier, which is a way it's a unique ID that you can fetch on the web. Good night. There are some sections that are automatically generated. Okay, sorry.
I don't hear it actually.
Yeah. Did somebody raise their hand? Okay.
Let's get you another one.
I get to sit down.
No. Problem fixed.
Yeah, there we go.
I'll trade you.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Back. All right. In this section, when I talk about the tooling, I'm going to mainly refer to the stuff called Markdown or RFC XML, Cramdown RFC, which is the tooling that's available to that turns it into that XML gobbledygook that Alice showed. Only real masochists XML never really got the way it was supposed to be, and got the adoption it wanted, and only real masochists like the RFC Production Center edit XML. Right? Everybody else prefers to edit in other formats. So things like the status of the memo, the copyright notice, and the list of rights that says, this is copyrighted by the IETF and anyone can freely use this document and so on. That's all automatically generated. Things like when you see the words must, may, or should, they have the following meaning that is documented and they point to another RFC. That's automatically generated. And most useful, the table of contents. So you just say section, 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 and that turns it into a nice thing that says 1.0, 1.2, 1. And so on. And here's an example of the auto-generated stuff. Every internet draft has a, this is an informational draft metadata. Determined since it's published by the IAB, it says, oh, it's not a standards, it's for your information. Required content, something every draft must have, and this will be carried forward when a draft gets approved by the working group, the ISG, and the overall IETF has a chance to review it. That content in the draft gets carried forward into the final published RFC. It will be updated and fixed by the RPC, the production center, to fix typos, subject verb agreement, that kind of stuff. Abstract, a concise description of what this document's about. This document describes a file transfer protocol via the secure shell protocol. The introduction, why we're doing this. Sometimes we have to securely transfer files between machines, and we don't want other people to be able to intercept or modify the contents as we transfer it. Therefore, we're using the secure protocol to do the file exchange. Security considerations. A meaningful thing, description of what happens if this is used, or mistakes, obvious mistakes you can avoid. For example, with the secure file transfer, if you pick an encryption algorithm that's easily broken, then your file content can be modified. If you, in looking at other things like, pardon me, DNS, you cannot trust DNS, the information you get back from DNS, unless it's been signed using a protocol and suite called DNS security. But you cannot, that would be a security consideration. If somebody modifies the DNS entry, then the following bad things could happen. That's the kind of stuff you put in a security considerations. IANA considerations, this is where usually a couple paragraphs, pro forma, or rather semi-formal language. It says, this is how you tell IANA, the people Leslie talked about in the previous session, to populate registries. The tense gets confusing. IANA will add the following entries to the such and such registry, or IANA will create a new registry and populate it with this. And then when they say create a new registry, you tell them what the requirements are to be added to it, because the document that defines a registry will not be the very last word on all of the entries in it. References, we divide them into two sections. Normative, meaning the things mentioned here have an impact on the document itself. And then informative, meaning this is things you might find useful. DNS would say things like Unicode is informative, but UDP is a normative thing because DNS traffic goes over UDP, to make up an example. Now, writing an ID. Anyone can write an internet draft. Sometimes they say ID, the hyphen is silent. Sometimes they say internet draft. Anybody can write an ID about any subject. No checking's done, no permissions needed. When you write one, anyone, pardon me. When you write one, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Is this, no, the cam. Thanks. Anyone can write one. When you submit one, we'll talk a bit more about that later, you are granting the IETF rights to use it. It doesn't take away your rights, but it says when you submit a draft, you are submitting it in confirmation, in compliance with the note well. But again, you're giving the IETF the rights to modify it, to use it for IETF processes. Once a draft is submitted, and so when you do a submit, there's a little warning message that pops up. You're granting these rights. We don't remove them. There've been one or two cases, handful of cases, where a draft has actually been removed because the author made a couple of really tasteless jokes, thinking they were funny in the April Fool's context, and it got a lot of people upset. And the author said, can we take? And so they were deleted. But it does not happen. Is the basic thing. Internet drafts have no formal status until a working group adopts it. Then the working group owns that draft and future modifications to it. There's a famous, well-known document called Draft W. Kamari, which stands for Warren Kamari. not a draft, and it's got a whole bunch of doggerel that says things like, this is a draft, I wrote it, it's nonsense, it doesn't mean anything. And it's just going to sit out there as a, semi-humorous example. First step when you want to write a draft, and if you want to have an RFC published, having a draft is the first way. It's even if you have just a first draft, it's a conversation starter. If you're skilled in XML and you're really great at it, boy, does the RPC have a job for you. But if you're like everybody else, the thing you should really do is do Markdown and Cramdown, which are community provided tools, more maintained, getting to be more maintained by the IETF LLC, but they are community maintained like lots of stuff. There are templates available for both things. If you go to the site authors.ietf.org, it has examples there where it says choosing a tool chain. Generally, if you're writing your very first draft or first version of your first draft, you might have a co-author. Follow their lead or someone who's done it before. Get advice from them. If you haven't, then I've said it enough. Add the content. There is required content, recommended content, and in general purpose content. And all of that is, the required content is the things I mentioned a couple slides ago: security considerations, IANA considerations, intro and abstract, it's bottom up. Language and style, we use BCP 14. That's an indirect, and that will point to a couple of standards, 2119, and I forget what the other one is. When to use terms like must, should, must not. There is an actual funny April Fool's Day RFC that adds new keywords like shouldn't, but we know you will, and so on. So it's amusing. The ISG has guidance on inclusive language and abbreviation. Our RPC has abbreviations and special terms that will be available. If you have special content like diagrams or formal language like augmented Backus-Naur form, which dates back to the definition of ALGOL, I think, ALGOL 60. It describes, it's almost like a pattern matching for tokens. You could say a mail header is a keyword, a colon, and then the content. And they literally decide what the content is. It's any of these printable ASCII characters plus, anyhow. There are tools to validate the special content. They can scan your draft and pull out the parts and say, yeah, this doesn't make sense. It's pretty impressive what they can do. Don't have to worry about it in your first draft so much. You can validate and test your draft. There is a separate thing called author-tools.ietf.org. These two websites don't look like the basic IETF websites or don't look like the data tracker. They're like WordPress websites, maintained by the staff, low effort, but high value, high content. And so there are things like you can validate your internet draft. You can look at specific content. You can validate specific content. You can render that into like, here's what a PDF would look like. Here's what the HTML will look like. You compare definitions. There's one of the buttons on there is ID NITs, internet draft NITs. What's a NIT? It's how many people here have pets? A lot of them, dog, cat. Yeah, it's like before you go out, you sit there and you pull the animal hair off or the lint off your clothing before you go out in public. That's a NIT. And these are the kind of little things. It will find things like, oh, you didn't include a copyright or you didn't have a references section. So that's what the NITs do. It's not an AI that's going to do language checking, but it's going to do things that it can find formally and automatically, stylistically. And so those were the buttons on the bottom in the authors tools section. Doesn't mean anything. You upload your draft in XML or Markdown, and you get back on your screen, or download what the different file formats are. Finally, submit the draft. Come back to the data tracker. The data tracker is the beating engine of the document management system of the IETF. They must be submitted in RFC XML. Cramdown will do that for you. There are additional tools. If you see I-D-template discussed or Martin Thompson's template discussed, it provides some GitHub tooling. And if you're on a Linux or Unix system, command line tool, a make file that you can say make draft or make submit. Or you can just do a submit and it will work through GitHub Actions in some cases. So you don't even need to have anything other than the document and a GitHub repository, and all of that stuff will happen for you automatically. One of the things that's interesting is you'll see sometimes when you look through the important dates section of a meeting, or notice about a meeting, is there's a cutoff. And that happens 2 weeks before the meeting. No more drafts can be accepted or published. Then once the meeting starts, it opens back up. But the intent was, and it's historic, so you could print everything out and read it on the plane while you're flying to the meeting. Nobody reads everything these days. Also, they tend to read it all on the web or on your phone or on your browser or what have you. But the publication cutoff is designed to give guaranteed think time and review time for drafts that will be, in particular, that will be discussed at the face-to-face meetings.
Rich, we have a question to please explain the difference between cram down versus markdown.
Sure. So the nice thing about markdown is there's so many types to choose from, right? So cram down, what it does is it adds some sections at the top. That's where you put the RFC or draft specific information. It's like key value pairs, like name, value, name, value. And then the bulk of the document, which is marked off by 3 dashes, is pretty much generic markdown. It also has provisions, extensions, so that you can, inside your markdown document, put things like two open curly braces and an exclamation point, RFC 1234, 2 closed curly braces. That will automatically get turned into, since there's an exclamation point, that will automatically get turned into a normative reference. And you can say things like the curly brace construct, comma, section 2, and that will automatically get turned into a hyperlink pointing to that document, that section in that document. So it provides some extensions to classic Markdown. It also does all of the standard things, paragraphs are separated by a space. You can have bullet lists where you just put a dash at the beginning of the line and nested lists. But if you know how to write Markdown stuff, or you've done it on GitHub or any other open source projects, it's very, very similar. There's just a section at the beginning that, as I said, includes the metadata that you'll need for getting through the IETF process. There are more resources. Look at authors.ietf.org. There's examples of the process, some of the tools to use, a catalog of all of the tools. There used to be a site called tools.ietf.org that's got devolved and evolved into these 2 subsites. So if you bump into that, it's not where it'll actually has content that says go here or here. And with that, we'll turn back to the publication phase.
Thanks. So if your internet draft makes it through the whole process that you heard about during the standards development session, and it's approved by a stream and sent to the RFC Production Center for publication, we are a professional editing service. We edit the document and format the document, and Auth48 is the name of the step at which we ask the authors to approve the edited document, the final document, before it becomes an RFC. The name is historical. Auth48 originally meant authors 48 hours. But the way that it works now is each author who's listed in the header of the document has to approve the document for publication before it's published. So it's not 48 hours. Typically, it's longer. This is showing the full process that the document goes through at the RFC Production Center. This final step would be also the time that we ask questions about any unclear text. So in addition to looking over the edits and deciding like, yes, my intended meaning is still intact, which is the goal of our editing. It's supposed to be a light pass. In addition to that, we may raise questions where you need to clarify text. The intended meaning is the most important thing. And if there's some change to the document that seems beyond editorial at this step, then in the case of an IETF stream document, we would ask the area director to approve the changes. The reason for that is because the document's already come out of the working group and represents the rough consensus of the group. And so we don't want to change any technical content at that point. The RFC Production Center are subject matter experts on grammar, punctuation, and the format of RFCs. And you are the subject matter experts on the technical content of your document. So this step, the Auth 48 step right before publication, is designed to make sure we're on the same page. When everyone approves the document, it's published in the formats that were already described, and announcements are sent to mailing lists, and the document is freely and widely available. If you have questions, now is a good time to come to the microphone. Also, I'll be here this week with my colleagues from the RFC Production Center. We'll be at a desk near the registration desk. Come by if you have questions about anything that we talked about today or RFCs. And my advice, go to authors.itf.org and grab a template and get started writing your idea.
And there was a question about cram down versus markdown, and there's very specific information on the website, and we're going to throw a link into the chat room where you can find that. I think, Yuri, that was your question about some specifics there. So we'll pop something in the chat room.
Anyone else? Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, you can put, yeah. So we have just a short little break right now. You know, we went over just a couple minutes, so between 5 and 10 minutes break, and then we're just going to do a quick summary wrap up and talk about the rest of the week and what's available to you all as new participants. So I'd say, yeah, stretch your legs. We'll get started about 6 minutes. Yeah. Very specific. Thanks, guys. Oh. No, it's a software. I don't know. You would have to probably ask Meet Echo because it's all through Meet Echo.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was because of the access as well. And as a qualitative researcher, I was like, that's like the best.
Give me a second and I can ask them. Let me just put the next set of slides up and then I'll ask them. Hold on one moment. It's good to hear that you think that it's good. I know in the beginning when they started doing transcription.
don't want more than 5 offices. But if there's people who have these conflict resolutions, you can have an acknowledgement section that says, we'd like to thank, thank so-and-so and so-and-so for their contributions. But in terms of the copyright and the rights granted, anybody in the IETF can use the document for IETF purposes.
I've asked the question to see if they answer right away.
If someone they lose their job or they get assigned to tag them out available, they'll say, hey, I can't work. Or someone picks up a document that is expired and not used for years.
Just to the right, the RC Production Center will have a desk throughout the week. And you can go and ask them all the questions. And show them if you've got any examples, any questions for what you're writing. They're going to do that. I haven't gotten, oh, he's writing right now. Sure.
So, yes. You contribute. You're not giving up your rights. You're adding this other person, this other organization, the IETF, has rights.
It's based on Whisper, but it's been customized by them. And the whole framework is open source.
It's also, yes, it's not, I think it's very close to the research group. The papers that go out, they have the passes anyway.
If you want, I can give you the email of somebody where you can contact them and ask for more information. Sure. All right, we're going to get started with our last session here. It's just the summary and wrap up. And just a reminder, if you do have questions related to internet drafts and RFCs, just to the right of registration, the RFC editor has a table there that's staffed throughout the week, and you can ask them as many questions as you want. And they also often have candy there in case you need a little sugar pick-me-up. So yeah, please visit them and ask questions. All right.
Yep. Okay, everybody. Just right. So I hope you've all enjoyed today. I hope this has been a useful set of sessions for you. As Michelle will remind you at the end, we send out a link to a survey, and your feedback would be very much appreciated at the end of it.
Did that just start too?
Sorry, slight technology issue. I can't move the slides on. Just 1 second. please. Okay, let's try again. Nope.
I'll do it.
Yep.
In the Meet Echo room where it wrap up, why is that not changing? I'll try this again. If that's unusual. The Meet Echo's tired. I don't know what's happening. I'm going to go back to.
Right, I'm just going to get the presentation up and remind me what I need to be talking about with you. So, we hope today has been useful for all of you. As I mentioned this morning, this is the second time that we have run this all-day session. So we hope that, well, we are still refining it and still adapting it and still teaching people to keep to time when they do their sessions as well. So if you we will be sending out a survey at the end of it, and any feedback you have on that would be very useful to help us. So it was our goal for this session that you would leave with a basic understanding of the IETF, how the IETF works, and the organization's structure. That you would have some useful information on this meeting and how to get the best out of this meeting. Some understanding of the leadership, the resources and the tools that are available to you. And we'll have 2 sessions later on today where you have more chance to meet the leadership. To introduce you to the hackathon, because if in future meetings as you come, that may be the place where you wish to start the weekend. To give you a basic understanding of the standards process and what's required as an individual as you go through the standards process, how to get you started writing an internet draft, and most importantly, hints about how to be effective. As we've explained, the IETF is a big volunteer-led organization, and learning to work with the other volunteers is an important part of it. So, thank you very much for coming. I'm going to hand over to Michelle now, who'll be able to talk about the other activities that we have for new participants. But at the end of this, we will send you a survey. If you could tell us what you think, that'd be very useful. And I'll be here as well for a bit. If you have any more feedback, please let me know. Thank you all very much for coming.
Sunday's a hard day to have meetings because that's when we find all the problems if, you know, Meet Echo's got some kinks or, you know, technology. But just a couple updates for the rest of the week. Immediately following this session, we have the new participants quick connections. It's often referred to like almost like technology speed dating, because we have a bunch of different tables, and at those tables we have experienced IETFers, and then you as new participants go from table to table and you can ask questions really about anything. They will have a button that says, you know, ask me about maybe their working group or security or, you know, all different types of topics. If we get a chance that you're looking for a particular person in an area, we'll try to connect you. But it's really just a chance to make some connections with the leadership, working group chairs, and other experienced IETFers. We will have refreshments. So again, that's immediately following this session in Doblone. Another thing we have going on is tomorrow night we have a new participant dinner. It is sold out, so if you got a ticket, we'll see you there. If not, maybe you can come next time because you are a new participant from your first meeting to about your fourth meeting. So you have access to all the new participant activities for a couple meetings because it takes a while to get used to everything. But we have that new participant dinner is on Monday night at the restaurant here in the hotel called La Albufera. And then on Thursday in the afternoon in Aranjuez, and this is all on the agenda, you don't have to remember it, we have a new participant social hour. And again, we'll have refreshments there and some leadership come and they talk to you about your week, you know, what went well, you know, how can we do things better, and just another opportunity for you to ask questions and maybe get some more information that you leave the IETF meeting with, and then, you know, start the next chapter of reviewing mailing lists or whatever work you're going to start on. So it's another opportunity to make some connections. Again, this is all on the agenda, locations and times. Other activities that are happening here at 123, after Quick Connections tonight, we have the welcome reception. So please join us. That's happening in patio 1 and 2 and 3. And then also right after and kind of overlapping with the welcome reception is something called Hot RFC. This is where somebody brings a new idea, a new question, a new problem to the IETF, and they do very quick presentations. There's no questions, but it gives them a chance to bring it to the IETF, introduce this topic, and maybe you have some interest, and then you can contact them after. On Monday morning, we have the Sisters group. You learned about that in a previous session. It's for women and non-binary participants. We do a little networking around breakfast time. And then on Wednesday, we have the main IETF plenary, and that gives the leadership bodies a chance to tell you, Jay will be actually presenting. You learn a lot about the numbers of the IETF, how many participants we had, and where did everybody come from, and other exciting and some not exciting bits of information about kind of the business of the IETF. It also provides the whole IETF community a chance to ask questions of the IAB, the ISG, and the LLC. So that's happening Wednesday night. On Thursday, we have the host speaker series. So our host Erickson, which we are very thankful for, helped us with this meeting, and they have somebody to talk to us on Thursday. I think it's a first come, first serve lunch for that. And you'll see on the agenda for the specific topics, so you can take a look at that. Thursday, we also have a sisters lunch, which requires a sign up. And then on Friday, we have a farewell reception where you can have some refreshments and say goodbye to your colleagues until you see them online or next time in person. Again, it's all on the agenda. The agenda is your friend. Still don't know where to start. In one of the emails I sent to the new participant list, and you'll see it on it's on the IETF website, is a blog post that introduces you to a bunch of topics that might be helpful. So check out that blog post. All the working group sessions are listed on the agenda. Also, area directors hold office hours throughout the week. So if you're wanting to talk to the security area directors about a potential topic that you might want to write an internet draft about, or really anything, they provide you an opportunity. You don't have to sign up or anything. You just go visit them and you can chat. Those are listed on the agenda. Excuse me. Connecting with other new participants. So of course, utilize the mailing list. We also have a meetup spot, and I'll let you know where that's going to be. We put that up tomorrow, just in case you want to grab lunch with fellow new participants. Gives you a place to meet, or even just to have a coffee. We do have coffee baristas that are going to start tomorrow. They're going to be both on this floor and the floor above, so enjoy the coffee. And we mentioned that if you need help with RFCs or internet drafts, the RFC editor has their desk. If you have questions about protocol parameters, IANA also has a desk near the registration area. We have a technical help desk too, if you're having trouble with the tools, with the data tracker. There's an opportunity to ask questions. And you can always visit us at the registration desk. If you can't find the information you're looking for, we are more than happy to help you. Above all, we want you to have a good time, meet new people, and accomplish what you set out to do at this meeting. And if there's anything we can do to help you reach those goals, let us know. You will be getting a survey, as Jay said, so please fill it out. It helps us improve our program, which makes for a better experience for future new participants. Thank you for your time and attention, and we'll see you throughout the week. So thank you. And any final questions, go for it. All right, we'll see you at Quick Connections. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Okay. So,
yeah, beds. So.
it's just, there's going to be food and beverages, and there's no presentation or anything. Just to relax. Yeah. That's for the new participants. And the other ones were full life. See you upstairs. All right. They're working on this problem right now. I don't want to keep you if I can't find it right away, because they're working on this. Do you want to write your email address here, which I will email you? You guys can actually ask me. I will post how does one sign up for the sisters? Just one morning to do. So, are you on the sisters mailing list? No, okay. I'll send you something. And I don't know if they had a cutoff or not to be able to plan, but since it's Thursday, I'm sure that they probably still have space. That's okay. I mean, I should be on the waiting list anyway, and I wasn't sure how to get on. Yeah, so I'll send you information for both, for the mailing list and for both. Okay.